going to record this. So this is going to be a comparison of the 6 kingdoms of life. Now, some of you I know got this in the 7th grade. Some of you I know maybe even remember this from elementary school, right? So this fits with the history of life that I was just talking about. Remember, we talked about the history of life and that we had certain types of life that came first, and then more that came later, and then there were sort of ages of different types of organisms that came along. So let's start with the kingdom of archaebacteria and eubacteria. So what do you think those kingdoms have in common in terms of, yes? No, you tell me. What? They are both single-celled, and they are both, look at this. What does this tell you right here? They are both bacteria. They're just slightly different. Right, okay. So if they're both bacteria, if this one's a prokaryote, what will this one be? A prokaryote, that's it. Okay. What does prokaryote mean? If you were to describe a prokaryotic cell, what would you say? What's the difference between a prokaryote and a eukaryote?
One has a nucleus, one doesn't.
Which one doesn't?
Prokaryote.
Yes, that's right. So prokaryotes are very simple, and in the process of evolution, that's why we think the prokaryotes came first, because evolution always starts with the simple organisms and then goes to the more complex. So prokaryote. Let's keep going to the right. So Protista, would that be a prokaryote or eukaryote? What do you think? Does an amoeba have a nucleus?
Yes.
Yes, and therefore it is a eukaryote. Yes, okay. So this is a eukaryote, and the key is, look, the bacteria are over on the left side, over there. And bacteria, we know, are both prokaryotic. Over here, look, eukarya means that everything in this domain, Protista, fungi, plantae, and animalia, are all eukaryotes. They are all made of cells that have nucleuses. They are all made of cells that have complex membrane-bound organelles. These are the guys, these are the kingdoms, Protista, fungi, plantae, and animals. They're all made of cells that have lots of organelles in them, mitochondria and lysosomes and all those things that we learned about in the beginning of the year, right? These are all more complicated cells. Even the Protista, even the amoebas, right, actually are made of complex cells. Bacteria, not so much. Bacteria, much simpler. Okay. Number of cells. Archaebacteria and eubacteria, would they be unicellular or multicellular? Unicellular, yes. They are, meaning that they're made, that they don't form multicellular organisms, right? They are independent living. Although if the more you learn about bacteria, you learn that bacteria actually aren't necessarily independent. They do a lot of communicating, but that's for AP Bio. So what about Protista? An amoeba would be, Protista are not multicellulars. Amoebas, parameciums, yeah. Most Protista are unicellular. So just because something is a eukaryote does not necessarily mean they're multicellular. The Protista is a kingdom of mostly single-celled simple organisms, right? The only thing that makes them different from the bacteria kingdoms is that they're a little larger and they're a little more complicated. Okay, what about fungi? Multicelled or unicelled? What do you think, Ariel? Yes, they are. Very good. A mushroom, right? A mold. Those are multicellular. Yes, those are multicellular. Okay. This one's already done for us, although it's misspelled. Sorry about that. Multicellular. Plants are all multicellular. What about animals? Definitely multicelled. Good. Very good. Multicellular. All right, doing great. Now let's go to the question of the cell wall. All right, just as a little review, Remember that every cell, no matter what kind of cell it is, needs a cell membrane, right? A cell wall is a thicker part outside of the cell membrane that is present in some cells and not in others, right? So this is the cell wall outside, and the thin one inside is the cell membrane. So the question is, of all these kingdoms, archaea and bacteria and Protista, fungi, plantae, animalia, which is the one that you're absolutely sure has a cell wall? Plantae, very good. So yes, plants have a cell wall. Do you remember what it's made of?
Remember, begins with C.
Made of,
Not chlorophyll. Not quite. It has an OSE ending. Not curious, cellulose. Cellulose.
I'm so pleased that you were trying to guess that. Okay, so fungi have cell walls that are made of chitin, which is a carbohydrate that kind of thickens it and makes it stiff. You're thinking of keratin. Good for you, though. Keratin, though, is not a carbohydrate, it's a protein. Keratin's in your hair and your fingernails. And that is a protein that helps animals with the parts that they need to be stiff, right? Very, very good. Cellulose is different. Cellulose is a carbohydrate that helps plants with their stiff parts, right? And chitin is also a carbohydrate that helps mushrooms with their cell walls. Okay, so animals, do we have cell walls? No, that would make moving very difficult, wouldn't it? No cell walls in animals. Very good. Okay. What about bacteria cells? What do you think? Most people say no, and that's a very common misconception. Bacteria, in fact, do. Yes, both of them. They have cell walls. In fact, cell walls are really important in bacteria because think about all the places where bacteria live. Some of those places are pretty nasty, and cell walls offer protection for them. So now you know.
Yes,
yeah, that's more advanced than I think I want you to worry about. You need to know the mushrooms is chitin. You need to know that the plants are cellulose, but don't worry about the bacteria. If you ever take AP Bio, I'll tell you all about it. That is awesome. Okay, Protista. Protista is, it depends. Okay, it depends on the organism. Some do. Some do. The plant-like Protista do, and some don't. The animal, like an amoeba, doesn't have a cell wall, or it wouldn't be able to ooze along like it does, right? So it just amoeba. Yeah, except that you wouldn't be able to appreciate music or dance or all those things that humans can do.
Amoeba not alive seems great though.
They're unencumbered by taxes.
Unless a Daphnia comes along and swallows you.
And then the mother amoeba's not being like, you gotta go out there and get a job. Other amoebas.
You guys are so funny. Okay. Source of energy and nutrition. Okay, so the things that we're looking for here, the only words, where's my pen? Here it is. The only words I want you to worry about is autotroph versus heterotroph. So let's talk about those words. Autotroph means what? Yes. That is beautiful. Yes. Autotroph means you can make your own food, usually by photosynthesis. You can make your own food. Beautiful job. And heterotroph means you can't, right? You can't make your own food. You have to eat it. You have to get it from somewhere else. Can't. Okay. So now let's go down through this. Oh, and I took the topics away. The two bacteria kingdoms are heterotrophic. I'll just put that in here. Heterotrophic bacteria. Bacteria, for the most part, they have to ingest or absorb food. They can't make their own food. There is one exception in the Eubacteria kingdom, and I will tell you what it is because you might see it on the SOL. One exception is cyanobacteria. Cyanobacteria is the one species of bacteria that is actually blue-green, and it can actually do photosynthesis. Very, very special cyanobacteria. And they think that it was the cyanobacteria that first put the oxygen into the atmosphere 2 billion years ago. That's a pretty big deal. They changed the sky from orange to blue by doing that. Kind of interesting. Okay, so heterotrophic, heterotrophic. All right, Protista. Boy, that is the garbage can kingdom. So guess what? Some are auto and some are hetero. It just depends, right? So a lot of the algae, like the algae in that tank right there, those are protistans that can photosynthesize, right? So they're autotrophs, but an amoeba would be a heterotroph. An amoeba can't photosynthesize. Okay. A fungi, what do you think a fungi would be? Can fungi photosynthesize? Can a mushroom do photosynthesis? No, therefore it must be heterotrophs. Yes, all fungi, by definition, the whole kingdom is heterotrophic. Well, except that they are sessile. And sessile means they're rooted to the ground and they can't move like an animal can.
I want to be a mushroom.
Cora would rather change her species. Let's just put that.
Are we not going to focus?
Cora wants to change her
Life of a
kingdom.
mushroom.
Okay.
Oh, mushroom life. Hashtag mushroom life.
Okay, so all heterotrophic, yes. In fact, most fungi are something, I'll give you a word, here's a fancy word. Saprophytic. What do you think that means? Saprophytic means that they love something, whatever sapro means.
Dead.
They eat dead things, exactly. They feed off of dead things, yes. You guys are hot stuff today. Saprophytic, okay. All right, what about plants? Autotrophs or heterotrophs? All autotrophs, yes. All plants do photosynthesis, yes. Okay, what about animals? Heterotrophs, very good. Okay, all animals are heterotrophs. That's it.
What if we just like sometimes photosynthesize?
I mean,
Like that we
If
ate.
we were autotrophs, we never have to eat anymore. You would make our own food.
It would be, it would certainly be interesting, wouldn't it? But then we would definitely be green.
Yeah, but then starvation would be solved.
Yeah.
No
No one would be hungry as long as there was sunshine, right? Interesting
Ooh,
idea.
yeah.
So cloudy days would be a bummer. Okay.
You still do the dark cycle.
Yeah, I guess. Okay. This is getting really interesting. All right. Okay, do you guys know what locomotion means?
Locomotive.
Locomotion, do the locomotion. What does locomotion mean?
Move.
Can you move? Right. Okay, methods of locomotion. So there's two choices here. Okay. You can either be motile, which means you can move and wiggle around, okay? Or you can be sessile, which means you're rooted to the ground. You might see these words in the S. I want to make sure you know you've seen them, okay? Motile means you can move. Sessile means you're rooted, right? Okay. So if I were going to go, let's go backwards. What do you think all the animals are?
Says so.
Motile, we move, we
yeah.
wiggle around. Yes, we're all motile. Yes, we're all. And in fact, now here's an interesting thing. You know that coral is an animal, right? And anemone is an animal. So they're actually sessile. They're only sessile when they're adults. They have a larva form that moves and squirms around. So as long as you have a larva form in your life cycle that moves and squirms around, you're considered an animal. Okay? Okay, what about plants? Definitely sessile. They are rooted to the ground. They cannot move. Right. Okay, what about fungi? Sessile, very good. Sessile, okay. Am I spelling that right? Yes. Okay. Now we get back into the Protista, the single-celled things, right? Okay, so a lot of the Protista are motile. They can actually swim around, but it depends. Some of them go by flagella. They have tails on them that help them to swim. Or amoeba have pseudopods, which help them kind of float along, slime along pseudopods. Fake feet, yes. Okay. The bacteria also. The bacteria, believe it or not, are also somewhat motile, although they float more than they swim. A lot of them have flagella. Also, they have these long tails that help them to move around. And I'm going to say that they're both like that. So the archaebacteria too. I'm sorry, I wrote that into the box there. But most everything looks like either sort of floats along with flagella. The only truly sessile or rooted kingdoms would be the fungi and the plants. That makes sense to everybody, right? Okay. Right. So remember that there are some animals that seem like they should be described as sessile, and they are when they are adults, right? Coral is a sessile creature. It's rooted to the bottom of the ocean. So is an anemone. It's a sessile creature. But when they were very young, when it was a tiny baby coral, it swam around in the ocean looking for a place to settle down and grow into a coral.
So that makes them motile.
That makes them qualify as an animal. Also, it helps that they don't have cell walls, right? And there's other cellular things that definitely put them in the animal kingdom. Yeah. There you go. Okay, so now reproduction. It's either asexual or sexual. So sexual means you have two parents. Asexual means you only had one parent that budded off or did mitosis or something, right? Okay, so animals are all sexual. All sexual. All animals reproduce with two parents. Meiosis is involved. And then you have a baby that is a mixture of the two parents. That's sexual reproduction. Plants are mostly sexual. Mostly sexual, but there are many plants that can reproduce by budding asexually, right? Like if you've ever had your mom take a clipping from a plant that she liked and put it in a glass of water, that clipping will form roots and go into another plant. That's asexual. Yeah. So there's plants that can do that, but mostly plants are sexual. Fungi, it's probably a half and half. Fungi can reproduce sexually, but most of the time it's asexual. Yes? That's right. Yes, that's absolutely right. And if the reproduction with spores is asexual. Fungi don't have seeds. Plants have seeds. Right. Very good. That's very good. I'm very impressed with your knowledge today. Yes. Asexual and sexual. They can do both types, right? And Ariel's right. Fungi reproduce with spores. I'll write that here. Fungi all reproduce with spores. Plants all reproduce with seeds. And I wish we could go more into that this year, but that's as much as I'm going to be able to give you. Okay, if you go back here with the single-cell organisms, most of these are all asexual. Because if you're a single cell, you don't have anything to have sex with, right? So asexual, and it's mitosis. An amoeba does mitosis, and it's reproduced itself. It's created a clone of itself, right? The bacteria are also asexual. Both of these, asexual. And but it's not mitosis. Their cell division has a special name. It's called binary fission. Yeah, but what?
Is that when we're meets up with the other bacteria?
Oh, that's conjugation, which
Oh.
is sexual, but it's not quite the same as having two parents.
Okay.
It's a little different. But okay, so what was I going to say? All of this, right? All of these is just cell division, right? These things reproduce by cell division. That creates clones, right? What's a clone? An organism that is an exact copy of its parent, right? So now maybe that this fits with the timeline that I gave you, that the time where there was nothing but bacteria and single-celled protistans, and all they were doing to reproduce was just cloning themselves and cloning themselves and cloning themselves. You can see why the Precambrian era lasted such a long time, because there was no way for evolution to really happen, right? There was no mixing or variation of the genes. The only way that a little single-celled organism could change would be by a mutation happening that it could survive and send to its descendants. So it wasn't until you had these kinds of organisms over here, these eukaryotic organisms that had all the sex and mixed up by meiosis, mixed up their genes and everything, then you had more variation, right? Sexual repro increases variation, right? Variation means the differences in a population, and speeds up evolution. I just wanted to make that point because that was a really, really big deal. If you look back at the timeline, I'll even go back to the other, wait a minute, let me go back to my other page that I drew for you, just so we can make a connection here. Wait, here it is, there. Okay, come on. There. Okay, so the timeline, right? Look how long the Precambrian era was. Just so long. And it was right here, really right about 500 million years ago. That's a lot of years ago. Right there, okay? When all of a sudden you had this blast of diversity happen, you started to get frogs and fish and vertebrates and dinosaurs and all kinds of interesting organisms. And that was because organisms started to have sexual reproduction. That was one of the big reasons why that happened. Why the Paleozoic and Mesozoic and Cenozoic eras are so much more interesting and have so much more interesting fossils in those rocks than the Precambrian, which was just single-celled life cloning itself over and over again. Okay, how are we doing? You guys had some really good participation there. Hopefully you found that interesting. Yeah?